Welcome to the Standard Signal. I am your host, Tzadala Lama. 15 years ago, Ethiopia's late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi warned that his nightmare would be, I quote, an Egyptian agenda financed by Gulf money. It was a prophetic remark that few paid it serious attention. Today, it reads less like prophecy and more like diagnosis. Ethiopia now finds itself at the intersection of three converging forces. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, once the clearest symbol of sovereign ambition, is increasingly subjected to coercive rhetoric and great power posturing. What was conceived as a national development project is now embedded in a dense web of regional and international power politics. At the same time, Gulf money, particularly from the United Arab Emirates, has moved beyond emergency financial support into deep strategic alignment. What began in 2018 when Prime Minister Abiy assumed power as assistance to stabilize a fragile economy has since expanded into trade, currency arrangements, security cooperation, and diplomatic coordination. This alignment, however, is unfolding as the Gulf state fractures. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are no longer discrete partners. They are increasingly open rivals confronting one another across Yemen, Sudan, Somalia, and the Red Sea. Egypt, Ethiopia's principal adversary over the Nile, is drawing closer to Riyadh and now enjoys renewed political backing from President Donald Trump on the GERD file. Against this backdrop, Jawar Mohammed has recently argued that the Horn of Africa has, I quote him, increasingly lost ownership over its own political destiny and become largely subordinate to political rivalries originating in the Middle East. Decisions of war and peace, Jawar warned, are no longer primarily made at home, but negotiated elsewhere and ratified domestically. The central question then is no longer whether Ethiopia has partners. It is whether Ethiopia is ready to navigate these rivalries or is forcibly pulled into them. When sovereignty is asserted loudly at home but negotiated quietly abroad, we must ask who is setting the agenda and at what cost. In this episode of the Standard Signal, I am joined by Jawar to examine how GERD, Gulf money, and intensifying regional rivalries are reshaping Ethiopia's strategic reality, and whether Meles Zenawi's nightmare has already arrived. Jawar, welcome back to the Standard Signal.
Thank you for having me back.
Jawar, it's very tempting to start with asking you, taking you back to the recent, what can I say? I don't even know how to frame it, but I am not interested in getting into discussing a conspiracy theory that saw you at the center of some 3 or 4 or 5 interagency investigations in the US. I know you have given interviews and posted explanation on your private social media account. So disappointingly for many audiences, we're not going to be indulging in that. Instead, Jawar, I started by bringing the prophetic remarks made 15 years ago by the late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi, who said, as I said in my introductory remark, that his nightmare scenario was an Egyptian agenda financed by Gulf money. We'll get to the recent geopolitical realignments because this is one of the topics that I wanted to discuss with you, Jawar, in the Horn of Africa and the issues of the GERD in a little bit. If I can start asking you to share your thoughts on whether, Jawar, today's predicament that Ethiopia finds itself was the result of miscalculation or is of a deliberate political choice. I'm asking you this question, Jawar, especially considering the ruling party's political background that can be traced to a political ecosystem that predicted this nightmare, this exact nightmare scenario. How do we read it? How do we read today's reality, in your view, Jawar?
I think it's a mixture of miscalculations, wrong choices, as well as some deliberate planning by the actors. This is not something that happens suddenly. It's something we've been watching. Myself, I've been reading about this thing. I've been talking to key actors from our domestic affairs as well as from the Gulf and other actors. I've extensively traveled to these countries for last 7-8 years. I have met with principals. I've met with people from the diplomatic, the security sides. I think I have fairly good understanding. I think the arrival of Abiy coincided with the emergence of the middle powers, particularly the Middle Eastern middle powers, consolidating their domestic security and economic capability, then starting to look beyond their borders to project their influence, to project their ambitions. Initially, there was no significant competition among themselves. When Emirates took Abiy under its wing from the get-go, by the way, they took him under the wing before he took power. And they fully consumed him, fully controlled him afterwards. If you look at the events of 2018, 2019, 2020, that's when the foundation was laid down. If you remember that huge extravaganza about Emirates coming to uplift Addis with this building of a lot of PR work. By the way, only one building was built in that site. The process of getting the Nobel Prize, then the events leading to the war. You can tell that there is earlier grooming, then there is a marriage, then there is a control. Now we are at a time when is a divorce coming, or is the marriage going to remain solid? So that's where we are. I think two things are happening for our country, which are really detrimental. Two layers of competition are coming that's affecting our politics. One is, as you alluded to it, the great power competition among the superpowers. We are at not only our country, the whole world is being shaken by what's happening. We have the rapid rise of China, and we have the American system struggling to contain itself. So this is shaking the world. Of course, our region is not immune. We are even more vulnerable. At the same time, we have these rapidly rising, highly ambitious middle powers who are scrambling over our region. So we are squashed between the superpowers who are competing among themselves, but also who are outsourcing their competition to the middle powers. And we have the middle powers who are sometimes acting autonomously, sometimes acting in collaboration with the great powers. It's so unfortunate that for Ethiopia, this is happening at the time when we are also dealing with a serious internal turmoil. And at the time when we have a leadership that is so short-sighted, walked straight into the trap. Mallah saw this, 10, 15 years ago. And even those of us who are younger, we have been reading, the signs were so clear. The cloud is gathering. It could have been possible to avoid it. But I think we got sucked into it.
So it's a mixture of, if I understand you correct, that it is a mixture of miscalculation or of deliberate political choice. I want us to discuss about the GERD, because I think right now Ethiopians are watching the space very nervously, particularly after the letter sent last week by President Trump to Egyptian President al-Sisi, but with a CC to the UAE and Saudi Arabia. I don't know if Ethiopians understand the magnitude of this moment, Jawar, and I want us to reflect on that one. Because GERD has been Ethiopia's most powerful symbol of sovereign agency, right? But suddenly it finds itself in this most aggressive narrative around it. And it's coming from Washington and not Cairo. I'm not doubling down when I ask you again, when we see the area where the Gulf money is influencing the Horn of Africa, including Ethiopia. And at the same time, you have the most powerful person in Washington clearly siding with Cairo. I want you to share with us, what does it mean when a country's symbol of independence is reframed by someone else? What is the danger? What are we looking at of this renewed involvement of President Trump, reframing and asserting GERD's reality in Egypt's favor? What are Ethiopians looking at, Jawar? How can we prepare ourselves for it?
Look, this is not a new development. This dates back to 2019 again. The GERD, the Nile politics, was made part of the Abraham's Accord. That's where the issue started. Let me tell you a story. This is in 2019. When Abiy goes to Sochi in Russia, he signs the preliminary agreement with Al-Sisi. He comes back to Ethiopia. I don't know if you remember this incident where he was promised $7 billion, and he comes and he tells us, he tells me actually. And I said, why are the West giving you $7 billion? His answer was, because they like my idea. Which idea? He said, the Madamar idea. It didn't make sense to me. And I went back, I did research, I had a conversation with diplomats and with a different group of people, that we realized that all this thing was connected to GERD. And as you remember, during Trump 1, the GERD issue went from the African UN mechanism, it went to the US. And even in the US, instead of the usual State Department diplomatic engagement, it went to the Treasury. And we had to scramble. A lot of the senior diplomats started to scramble to force him to withdraw from that. What President Trump did now is nothing new. He just resurrected that initiative from 2019-2020. Look, back in the day, we were able to resist because we were relatively stronger. Ethiopian society was relatively stronger. Internally, although we had a lot of political contradiction, we were going through this tumultuous transition, we were relatively okay. So we were able to resist it. But now, internally, we are socially fragmented, politically fragmented. Our security is not where it was. One. Second, diplomatically, in 2019, although the President Trump came clearly on the side of the Egyptians, the push was not that strong. Trump 2 is a lot more aggressive, a lot more assertive, as we can see in different other cases, than Trump 1. Another issue is, in 2019, although different countries for different reasons in the Middle East do kind of politically and diplomatically show some sympathy for Egypt, they were not aggressive. They didn't have a stake in the game to stand against us. Now, we have become part of the Middle Eastern political competition. Ethiopia is clearly on the side of Emirates. It has become the vassal. It has become the state that pretty much facilitates transportation of weapons and soldiers and others, even giving training ground inside our land for the war in Sudan. Saudi is against this. Saudi is trying to squeeze Emirates out of the region. Now Saudi has a vested interest to take side with Egypt. So now we are dealing with Egypt plus US and plus Saudi. That is a powerful coalition. And that's quite resisting and surviving that level of pressure. Financial pressure, diplomatic pressure, and security pressure without cutting ties with Emirates, without recalibrating our engagement, diplomatic and security engagement, without focusing on restoring domestic stability and domestic cohesion, I think that will be difficult. And we've been squeezed from both from the river and the sea, from the Nile River and from the Red Sea. And the political Red Sea that Abiy tried to push, a very short-sighted, untimely push, has helped Egypt to box us between the river and the sea.
You know, speaking of this pressure, I think it's important for us to be also remember that in October 2020, President Trump, during his first presidency, has threatened that Egypt would, I quote him, blow up the dam, perish the thought. But in recent weeks, also, he has repeatedly claimed that the US financed GERD. And now this latest letter, which unsurprisingly was also CC'd to UAE and Saudi Arabia, as I alluded to earlier. Now he is saying that he put GERD mediation at the top of his agenda. And also forcibly said during his meeting at the Davos World Economic Forum meeting that he made the claims that the dam stops the flow of the water to Egypt. So when we talk about that external pressure, this is a very serious pressure that Ethiopia is facing. I think everybody could agree to that. And at the same time, Jawar, you know, the ruling party asserts that the GERD is a national interest. And there are so many things that are going for a national interest nowadays. And I don't have any disagreement by saying that the GERD is a national interest. I treat it as such. But the party remains mute against this repeated misrepresentation and pressure, Jawar. How are Ethiopians going to get mobilized to even say no, you know, to even revive our slogan that we campaigned for, saying it is my dam? How should Ethiopians protect this national treasure of theirs against this kind of forceful, when the ruling party that is governing the country chooses silence against this kind of assertion? What needs to be done, Jawar, in your opinion?
I have a difficulty really taking a stand these days. President Trump repeats that the US financed the project. As far as we're concerned, Ethiopian people financed it. There are two contradictions that have emerged over, there is a narrative that this is self-reliant, full Ethiopian financed with our blood, with our tears, with our money, with our prayers, right? That was the narrative that built the GERD. But two things happened over last year. Before President Trump said the US financed it, there was a speech by Abiy at some meeting, if you remember, where he said the Ethiopian people's contribution to GERD is only 12 billion. At that point, we're like, what is he talking about? Is he trying to create distinction between the Ethiopian people and the Ethiopian government? Isn't the government, the money of the government, also money that is generated from the public? Are we sure that when Trump says we financed it, there is no truth to it? Earlier, I mentioned about this conversation I had with Abiy in 2019, 2020, where he was also publicly saying that they gave us 7 billion to finance this Madammer thing. I think there is need for transparency from the Ethiopian government. When they refuse to say anything about it, when it's blatantly saying, we financed this project, the Americans are saying, the American president saying, we financed the project. If that's not true, why is the government muted? Is there something we don't know? You see, with what's happening over the last 7 years, as I've written about this, I spoke about it, the personalization of politics, the personalization, individualization of our diplomacy. I have screamed about this. Our relationship with Emirates particularly, there is no, it's not state to state, it's person to person. almost our entire diplomatic engagement, the security engagement with external actors over the last 7 years it's a one-person show. Abiy dealing with America, Abiy dealing with Israel, Abiy dealing with Emirates, Abiy dealing with Turkey, Abiy dealing with Azerbaijan, not the Ethiopian government, not the Ethiopian state. Because of this, if somebody asks me, when Trump says America financed the GERD, I can't say he's lying because I can't be sure. Because there is so much flow of finance to Ethiopia and out of Ethiopia through informal non-state mechanisms that we really need to demand the government need to come clean. And when there was this letter, the Ethiopian government did not protest, did not respond. It's muted. What do the American government has on the Ethiopian government that forces it from even politely protesting against the continued and repeated assertion, as well as, this letter, with all due respect to Americans, this letter is not a letter of mediation. This is a letter of dictation. The content of the letter was clearly the United States is advocating for Egypt, an entity, a state that has already taken a position clearly on a dispute with one side, cannot be a mediator. The Ethiopian government could not even politely protest against this. Why? What is going on? I think we are in trouble. You mentioned earlier, we launched a campaign, saying this is my dam. We need fairness. We need negotiated through the older mechanisms of all the riparian, the tributary countries, the countries that contribute to Egypt or benefit from Nile has to participate in it. Now that all have been thrown away. The United Nations mechanism, the African Union mechanism are not even copied in this letter. Why is
it's important to mention that the GERD negotiation has been confined into the technical team, particularly following the signing of the Declaration of Principles between Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt, and the negotiations and the deals were happening, specifically and in fact exclusively within the technical team until, as you said earlier, when Prime Minister Abiy went to Sushi and agreed with LCC to involve the World Bank and the American government. The campaign that Ethiopians launched, the It Is My Dam campaign, was essentially a campaign that reversed that course. And what scares me, Jawar, right now is that we don't even have that energy anymore to be able to rally behind this symbol of sovereignty that Ethiopians built through their blood and sweat. But it takes us to connect it to what you said about this personalized diplomacy and its fallout. Maybe what we're experiencing right now is the direct result or outcome of that. And we have to take a step back, Jawar, and start by reliving what happened in 2018 when Abiy came to power. The UAE started its direct involvement in Ethiopia's affairs by, I think it became the first country to pledge $3 billion privately to the prime minister. At the time, it was framed as, essential financing to stabilize Ethiopia at a moment of crisis, because we were coming out of that 3-4 years of popular protests that dismantled the EPRDF regime and brought in Abiy to power. But that support has since evolved into military, trade, currency, and security partnership between Ethiopia and the UAE, Jawar. And there's not much conversation between Ethiopians. There is no concrete evidence that these agreements are institutionalized. And you have been advocating for that for a while now. There is no public debate. There is no publicly available knowledge that it is bounded by the parliament. I have to ask you because maybe we need to start making connections here, Jawar. Is Ethiopia today acting as a sovereign actor, navigating these challenges, or can we say it has become a system being managed by external incentives and pressures? Could it be the reason why we cannot even stand up and say no to this kind of diplomatic bullying against this national treasure that the GERD we have? What is your comment on that, Jawar?
You mentioned earlier that publicly, for example, when Abiy came, they pledged 3 billion. We know about this, right? Since then, the Emirates claim that they have poured in tens of billions of dollars into Ethiopia. I'm not going to dispute that, but I'm going to ask, one, where did that money go? Is there any road that has been built with Emirates money? Is there any factory that has been built? How many jobs have been created with this Emirates money? And the mechanism where this money came through, were we borrowing it? Was it a grant? If it's a grant, in exchange for what? Look, I have no business of picking between the competing middle powers. But the mechanism worries me. I'm interested in sustaining the state as well as improving the livelihood of our people. Any external relationship we have with any country has to contribute to strengthening the state and to improving the livelihood of our people. The Emirate approach is quite worrisome from the experience inside Ethiopia as well as from their activities elsewhere. Inside Ethiopia, as I said earlier, and this is not before saying this in public, for the last 7 years, I have been meeting the Emirates. And my message has always been consistently, what are you doing? What's your relationship? Are you having a relationship state to state? Are you investing in an individual or in a state and a society? Evidence clearly shows the Emirate investment is on the person of Abiy and with no dividend for the state or for the society. The state and society has not gotten any stronger. Abiy has been able to consolidate power and survive multiple challenges through their money, through their drones, their weapons. But the Ethiopian state continued to deteriorate. One, this worries me about our relationship with the Emirates. Second, what we are seeing in Sudan, in Somalia, in Yemen, in Libya, wherever there is Emirati footprint, we don't see a project of state building. We see a project of destruction of the state. We don't see a project of building social cohesion. Instead, they are financing social fragmentations. Someone was saying, I don't know, I think I was talking with you, where we said the only place where the Emirates are supporting a government is in Ethiopia. They are not supporting, that's a mistake. They are not supporting the government. They are supporting a ruler who is acting not as a statesman, but as a non-state actor. What distinguishes a statesman from a non-state actor? What distinguishes a prime minister, a president, from a liberal leader? A prime minister or a president, his relationship with external players would be through a structured, institutionalized state apparatuses. There's little difference between how Emirates deals with Abiy and how Emirates deals with the various entities in Somalia, the various warlords in Sudan and in Libya. I think this puts us in a very, very difficult position. When you bring this to a GERD, our internal mismanagement of politics, as well as our quite harmful relationship with the outside world, has made us so weak that today, let alone resist the pressure on GERD. I don't think it's only about GERD, by the way. It's about making us sign an agreement that will prevent us any development on the Nile down the road. We are at a position where, let alone resist. You said earlier, in 2019, 2020, we were able to resist. Now we cannot resist. The government cannot resist because the government is literally in the pocket and being squeezed from left and right. And the society cannot resist. One, it's been fragmented. And second, it is confused. It is confused because what is President Trump talking about? Why the government quiet? Where are we heading? Where are things? So our society is confused and fragmented, and the state has been captured by external entities, and the fate of our national interest has it became subordinate to individual interest. The outcome is complete collapse of the ability of the state and society to fight for its interest.
It's important to point out, Jawar, and to discuss the direction that the government is outlining, particularly with this, narrative of the tale of two waters. The ruling party has clearly outlined that having a sovereign access to the Red Sea is one of the indisputable national interest for Ethiopia. Now, we briefly discussed about this with you when you first appeared in this podcast, Jawar, that you are of the view that there is no Ethiopian that would dispute for Ethiopia to have access to unimpeded access to port use and to diversify its commercial, usage of ports other than Djibouti. I think Ethiopians in general agree with that, and we agree, and I agree myself. But Jawar, I don't know how we can frame this intersection that the ruling party created of the tale of two waters, which is the GERD, the Nile water, which is the source of the GERD, and its ambition to access the Red Sea. Jawar, do you see a complication there? Do you probably see the ruling party for it is stated ambition of having a direct and sovereign access, maritime access to the Red Sea, that it could probably end up compromising the sovereignty of the GERD? Is this a worry that keeps you awake at night?
More than on the GERD, even for the survival of the state itself. Look, myself and vast majority of our citizens, we believe we cannot be spectators in the Red Sea, where states small and big, far and near, participate in the Red Sea, Indian Ocean security and political theater. We cannot be spectators. We cannot be spectators because any fallout, any development in that area directly affects us because our entire trade comes through this route. And this is our backyard. This is our sphere. What happens in Somalia or Somalia inland or in the Somali water, in the Djibouti side, in the Eritrean side, does directly affect us. Therefore, we have to have a say. We have to have a say. Any attempt to completely shut us off is unwise, is unfair, even if this generation of Ethiopians are too divided or too fragmented to assert. Down the road, it will be a continuous, struggle. That said, the way we approach it need to take into account our domestic capabilities, our domestic realities, our neighbors' realities, as well as international and regional dynamics. Starting from, the debacle with the Somaliland agreement, all this sea access politics Abiy pushed was untimely, unwise, and without any considerable thinking and planning. Look, this is not new. We had this conversation with them 2018, 2019, and later on after prison as well. But this agenda was pursued not so much because he actually meant to secure it. One, it's a tactical diversion from domestic challenges. Second, which for a long time I resisted to accept, but it seems increasingly a fact, that this was an agenda pursued by Emirates through Ethiopia. That's what complicates things. For example, Saudi is our our biggest trading partner. I think they're our number one destination for our export. And millions of our citizens work there. We have strong relationship. I don't think they have that much of a strong opposition to our presence on the Red Sea. But if we are seen as a proxy for the Emirates, the whole game plan changes, the whole calculation changes, and that's what's happening. Now, a year ago or 2 years ago, maybe it was the Eritrean government that was accusing the Ethiopia of, advancing an external interest. But now we have multitude of analysts and the state that are suspecting that Ethiopia's push or Abiy's push for Red Sea access is not because Ethiopia wants it, but because somebody wants to find a foothold on this side of the Red Sea through Ethiopia. That is really gaining ground. That is gaining ground among analysts, among observers, among diplomatic community in our region and elsewhere. This is complicating, and this has become quite useful to Egypt because for a long time, us and Egyptians we have been disputing for eternity about this Nile issue, and at some point we're going to have to come to an agreement. Of course, they have been leveraging their international presence, their international leverage to pressure us for a long time. We have been resisting it by using our domestic unity on the Nile issue, as well as mobilizing our neighbors. Now, back in the day, the only advantage they really had was their influence on international institutions and some great powers. As far as domestic and regional, particularly Africa, was concerned, things were favoring us during Mallas, during Mengistu, during Haile Selassie. Now, even regionally, because of this misguided push of access to the sea, which threatened so many of our neighbors. It threatened the Djiboutians, of course, put us into direct confrontation with Somalis. It even scared the Kenyans. With the support for RSF, we alienated the Sudanese. Now, almost all our neighbors are fearful of our aggressive approach. They are forced, or they are pressured, they are cornered into taking side with Egypt. So regionally, our neighbors are now taking side with Egypt. Across the Red Sea, Saudi is now taking side with Egypt. Internationally, we have the Americans taking the side with who is supporting us. Even Emirates, I do not believe Emirates will stand with Ethiopia when it comes to the Nile issue. So we are all alone. And when standing alone, we are so fragmented and we have a leadership that's completely lost the game.
It becomes important for me to highlight, I think 2 weeks ago, I had a podcast with another guest where some of these issues were discussed. And my guest at that time is of the view that, the Ethiopia's approach right now is, following a strategic silence and exploring without necessarily, attaching itself to an end game of loyalty with one force or another, but exploring its own options with different, countries and forces, and exploring its own options as well for its demand for access to the sea. When I say about Ethiopia, it's the ruling party that I was referring to. But we are seeing the recent news that is dominating the Middle East and Horn of Africa is the Saudi-UAE rivalry. And I don't see in the domestic media, particularly, in the highly monopolized media landscape by the state in Ethiopia, to discuss about Ethiopia's exposure. Also to the GERD, it's also the same. I don't see much discussion, deliberation, public debate about that. And I know some of them would say the reason why we're not responding to this pressure coming from Washington about the GERD is that the GERD is built. It is a done deal. So that is the reason that is given to. I'm just mentioning that one here as a disclaimer. Jawar, the Saudi and the UAE rivalry it has these two countries have moved from managed competition to a very aggressive and open confrontation across Yemen. And it's the same in Sudan and in Somalia and across the Red Sea. This is transforming the regional environment in which Ethiopia operates. And Ethiopia is expressing its need to be present. But Addis Ababa is deepening its strategic alignment only with Abu Dhabi, as it was recently seen in the new strategic document that they have signed a few weeks ago. I think it's fair to say that this is increasingly exposing Ethiopia to the costs of that rivalry. But our diplomatic engagement is not openly discussing that. So I think I have to ask you here, Jawar, is Ethiopia prepared for this rivalry, for this Saudi-UAE rivalry? Do we have the diplomatic instruments to help us withstand this rivalry? What is the best course out of this, or the best way to discuss this, Jawar, to make it a public domain, in your view?
There are two possible answers. One is the one Abiy gave about a week or two ago, when alluding to this global and regional competitions and crisis, he says, in crisis we benefit. That's one answer. My answer is, from this particular crisis, we are going to suffer and suffer severely. Abiy's argument is, when these big forces compete and clash, we will be able to milk it from left and right. That is true if you are not part of the conflict, if you are not already signed up for the conflict, if you are not already perceived as one instrument in that conflict. Abiy and Abiy's Ethiopia are deep in this conflict. It's no secret anymore that Emirates is almost acting like a protectorate for Ethiopia. Ethiopia has become a vassal state to Emirates. And not only in our domestic affairs, but also something the Ethiopian government has resisted for a long time. Has the Ethiopian government been supporting some rebels left and right in history? Yes. But it usually did it on its own accord. But Ethiopia has been shipping weapons that come from Emirates and other sources to RSF for the last since the war started. But it used to be done secretly, but no more secretly. Now we have a camp for them on the border, with possibly to start a new front from that side. We're deeply part of this conflict. Until probably a month ago, it was fine for us to dance with Emirates because nobody was challenging the ever-growing Emirati influence in our region. But now with Saudi throwing in the towel and moving in really big like they did in Yemen and in parts of Somalia, we are the next. Because one, we are deeply involved in Sudan. Second, our ties to Emirates is so deep, we are extremely vulnerable. How can we get out of it? How can we, save ourselves from this? I think that's the question at the time, and that's what people within the state and people within the academia, within the intellectual community have to really seriously think about it. For Abiy, of course, he has a choice to decouple himself from, the Emirati project in the region, to recalibrate our relationship with others, but also to reduce our internal vulnerabilities by ending the civil wars. Is he going to do that? I think time will tell. Is he capable of shifting his alliance? Yes. Sometimes I see people saying the Emirates have such a strong hold on him. He is not going to, break away from them. He will, if they continue to lose ground like they did in Yemen and Somalia, if they start to lose ground in Sudan, he will be forced to change position. Second, cutting ties with them or reducing ties with them is going to come with a cost. He fears because he has handed our entire military institution to the Emirates. I can't go into details, but the level of dependence of our military man and machine on Abu Dhabi is incredible. We have never been this dependent. During the Mengistu time, our military was dependent on the Russians, but nowhere to the extent our military is so dependent on Abu Dhabi today. It's not going to be easy because he fears that they could do something domestic. They could engineer something domestic on him. And also, he has to find alternative sponsor because he cannot stand by himself because he doesn't have the domestic support or the domestic situation that will enable him to stand tall by himself without a godfather from outside. If he find alternative godfather, probably he will be able to shift side. But the next months will be important. What will be important? One, is he going to focus on repairing domestic damages? Is he going to de-escalate the rhetorical war with the Tigrayans, with the Eritreans? And most importantly, is he going to reduce and eventually end supplying the civil war in Sudan? If he makes these moves, hopefully things will be better for him, of course, for us. If he continues with the current path, I think we are heading for deeper and darker into the crisis.
There are two scenarios, Jawar, that are increasingly being discussed among the corridors of the diplomatic community with regard to the latest unfolding in the Horn of Africa and the rivalry of the UAE, the Saudi-UAE rivalry. Some fear that this attack and depositioning of the UAE from its strategic locations, be it in Somalia or in Yemen or in Sudan, is going to lead to two things. One, maybe an increasing dependency on Ethiopia, on Abiy Ahmed's Ethiopia, or an increasing disengagement, both of which are not good news for Ethiopia. This is the discussion point. Where that is going to lead, based on what you said now, the dependency in the military. We've seen the military air show over the past week, and we've seen the involvement of not only the UAE, but air shows from Belarus and countries, other countries. I believe, maybe, I don't know, Turkey. I'm not very sure about that. So, based on your analysis now of the depths of its involvement with Ethiopian military, either of these two scenarios are going to bring good news for Ethiopia. But again, these are not issues that Ethiopians are honestly discussing at the moment. Jawar, let me bring you to the article. I'm not going to let you go before discussing domestic affairs as well. I know that the regional issue is much more pressing at the moment, but it doesn't mean that there are no pressing issues domestically. But before we move into that, I want you to reflect on your article, because I find it very interesting about the Horn of Africa, in which I said that you said the region has increasingly lost ownership and agency over its own, political destiny, and it has become subordinate. Yes, we've been discussing about that. Tell me a little bit more about it. Enlighten us more. Particularly when you say like decisions of war and peace are no longer decided at home. Parliaments have become obsolete, and negotiations are done elsewhere and ratified domestically, even in these conditions where parliaments have become obsolete, like in Ethiopia. Just say more about that. If you can, also by adding, actual anecdotes to this analysis of yours.
Look, our states, the states in Horn of Africa and East Africa, and Africa at large, they have been, dependent to a large extent on outside forces since independence, since 1960s. There has been some relationship, in the Western African countries, with France, some of them with Britain, others with US, others with Russia, China. But what we are seeing back in the day, during those times, those states were aligned or who continue relationship with the Francophone states. It was a state to state. It was a relationship between the French government and its counterpart in West Africa. In our side, during the emperor, we had our relationship was with the West mostly. It was government to government, state to state. During the Cold War, when the Soviets and the Americans were courting different countries, they were courting governments. They were trying to, they court the governments, they want those governments to adopt their ideology of either communism or capitalism. My point is, it was a state to state. They were trying to capture institutions. They were trying to influence institutions and decision making through institutional mechanisms. What we see with the current middle powers is quite different. They identify individuals and they cultivate relationships with those individuals. They try to advance their interests through the individual by fulfilling the individual's ambition, material or political ambition or security ambition. Because they found it. Why? The question is why? Why are they doing this? I think they found it much cheaper. Just like in 19th or 18th century relationships, they found it cheaper and more expedient to advance their material and security interests by co-opting a specific general or a specific political leader instead of working with the whole machinery of the state. Having said that, let me give you some anecdotes. Take Somalia. The middle powers did not really lead to the collapse of Somali state, but the middle powers have played a significant role in preventing the Somali state from reconsolidating centralized governance. How? Every regional president has a patron across the Red Sea. And they also create a relationship with whoever is going to come next. I've been observing that what was happening in Somalia for a while, basically since 2018 or even before that. Any major development in Somalia usually is preceded by some gathering across the Red Sea, either in Doha or in Abu Dhabi. The same has been happening in Ethiopia. For most part, the relationship was with Abiy, but it has begun to branch out. Our entire senior military leadership travels to Abu Dhabi at least twice, 3 times a year. Do you know, almost none of our generals get treated elsewhere. They always go to Abu Dhabi for treatment, for their family shopping, for personal vehicles and others. This I tell you from intimate knowledge. In Abu Dhabi, I have seen with my eyes. Our military officers have their own patrons across, not only the prime minister. So this relationship, and also there are these things we don't pay attention to. About 6 months ago, the entire leadership of Oromia regional state were shipped to Abu Dhabi for training, but there was no really training. It was a co-optation mechanism where they established, it was almost a recruitment effort on behalf of Abu Dhabi to capture these people. This is actively happening in Ethiopia, but it already happened in Sudan. It already happened in Somalia. Now, I think Ethiopia is the last frontier where they are now branching out beyond the prime minister's office into the regional states to capture state and society, not as a whole, but in its fragmented manner. I had a conversation with them, with various entities. And I have conversation with Western leaders, Western diplomats, Eastern and others. What makes so different conversation you have with these people is when they talk to you, it's never about politics. It was never about a country. It's never about Ethiopia or Oromia or anything. It's about you. What do you want? What can we do for your family? What can we do for you? So I think this approach is really what's fueling what's happening. As we said earlier, I think we are in a deeper problem. We are not really talking about it. It became hush hush because many of us were trying to figure it out. There is also it's also it's also intimidating and scary the level of their infiltration, but I think it's getting late, and we have to discuss and we have to debate about it. I am not against relationship with Emirates or Saudi or others, but those relationships, whether it's with Eritreans or Sudanese, it has to be official, it has to be institutionalized, it has to contribute towards our state building, and it has to contribute towards improving the well-being of our people. If we don't do this, I think it just exacerbates the suffering of our people on the road.
It is with this backdrop, Jawar, before I let you go, I want you to comment on domestic affairs. Recently, the two major Fano organizations have announced liquidating individually each other, but then joining and forming one frontier. I don't know if you have provided your comment analysis about that, but where do you see this decision leading towards, given that the conflict in the Amhara region is entering its third year and the playbook is the same? We have seen the same playbook playing out in Amhara region that was playbook from Oromia region that playing out in Amhara region. The regime is repeatedly saying that they are wiping the rebels out, the armed groups out in the next 1 month and 3 months and 10% and everything. Oromia has entered its 8th year now since the conflict in that region started. I think the trajectory for the Amhara region is also the same. The playbook is the same. But this announcement may shift things. I don't know what your reflection is about that, Jawar, or how closely you are following that development. Your comments, please.
Yes, I've been following. I think, look, these rebel groups, whether in Oromia and in Amhara, them coming together more than impact on the battlefield, I think it has impact politically. I'm of the view that modern insurgency is different from older day insurgency of the OLF and TPLF and EPLF days. That was, some strong radicalized, nucleus group getting radicalized in universities. They go to the jungle, then they branch out, they grow, and they maintain, centralized control over evolution of the insurgency. Modern insurgencies, both in Ethiopia and Middle East, elsewhere, they are an outcome of popular uprising, and they don't have, they don't have a centralized origin. Actually, they have a decentralized origin because these young people who were protesting, who were engaged in popular protest, when the repression comes, they go to the jungle. So they have strong local autonomy. They have strong operational autonomy. They have common objectives, and they share branding, whether it's oil or Fano, and some symbols. Actually, being decentralized has made these insurgent groups quite effective because they are accustomed to the terrain, they can be flexible, they can be pragmatic, they have given the government quite a difficult time by not being centralized. By not being centralized, even when the government co-opts commanders, the soldiers remain in the jungle. So the effort to re-centralize or centralize the Fanos or the OLA, its impact is not so much on the war, but I see it as a positive development for the future. When you have so many fragmented rebels, finding a political settlement, which is ultimately the solution, which is ultimately how we are going to end these wars. It is better to have a centralized, politically unified rebel group, other than having 10 Fanos or 10 OLS or 10 TPLFs. It's better to have have them in compartmentalized in one group, so that when we come to the table, when the time arrives to come to the table, we will be able to reach political settlement as a bloc without having different groups competing and playing spoilers in peacemaking process. So I'm encouraged that they have moved to that level. As far as the war is concerned, again, this domestic look, there is no way the government can defeat these rebels. They cannot. The rebels in Oromia are entrenched. The rebels in Amhara are entrenched. They control the vast area of the rural part of the country. They are emerged as key influencers of security and politics in their respective regions. Having them on the table, not through retail, not through one-on-one, but as a bloc will be necessary. I see it as a positive development.
Jawar, thank you very much. I hope that positive development, what you're referring by that positive development is that it makes it convenient or easy for negotiated settlement. We're headed towards an election. I don't know how that negotiated settlement is going to come, but that will be a topic for another podcast. Thank you for joining me for this one, Jawar, and I hope to see you again to discuss. We're having an election, so I'd like to have you back to discuss about the upcoming election, because your party somehow is participating. So this would be a topic for the next podcast, Jawar. Thank you for this one, and have a wonderful time.
I don't think we should waste our time discussing elections. We have other much more pressing priorities down the road. Anyway, it's good to be back, and you're doing a wonderful job. Keep pushing. I think this is a much needed discussion, and I think other people should also join you to air their perspective, because we are, as I said, we're facing some serious challenges down the road, and the more we discuss and brainstorm, the better it is for us.
I hope so. Thank you, Jawar.
Thank you.